Hey everyone, this is Khara CrossFit Brindle. Welcome back to the channel. I have Ashley back with us again. Hey Ashley.
Hey.
So we had another video we wanted to put out, something else that's on our mind. So I was telling Ashley off recording that I've had a couple different consults, free consults pop in the last week and a half, and it's a lot of candidates saying, "Hey, I heard I could take Medicaid," and I was like, "Yes, and." So somewhere in our community, I don't know where this information is coming from. I've heard rumors it's from Dora. I haven't found an email like that. I've heard rumors it's from other supervisors. I don't know where it's coming from. Let's just clear the air. As a candidate, you can take Medicaid, but these folks are coming in saying, I want to start my own private practice and I want to serve Medicaid members in my practice. And that, of course, is where this is not going to be what they're hoping for. So before we go there, what it means to take Medicaid as a candidate, let's talk about the different types of supervision, because I think that's going to clear this up a little bit. So we have clinical supervision for your hours for licensure. We've got administrative supervision, and then we have supervisory billing, which is what we're talking about with Medicaid and some insurances. So Ashley, let's define the first two, clinical and administrative supervision first. What would you say about those?
I would say exactly what you said. Clinical supervision is a supervisor who is fully licensed and has the appropriate education and training. That person is providing supervision to someone who is working towards licensure. And that should be very clear. There should be a supervision disclosure statement. There should be goals. Both parties should know exactly what's going on and what is expected as part of that clinical supervision.
Mm-hmm. And so for some folks that are doing only clinical supervision, but not doing the second part, which is administrative supervision, clinical supervisors tend to define themselves as we're staffing cases, we're looking at countertransference and transference, we're looking at self-therapist work, like we're doing the meat of what most of us as supervisors love to do, which is this
Yes.
clinical
Yeah.
component of
Mhm.
tell me about your clients and how you're feeling about them and the work that you're doing. And so when we think about these three different buckets of how supervisors might show up, clinical supervision is the one that most of us love the most
Mhm. Yeah, I
because it's
totally
fun,
agree. Yeah.
and it's dynamic. With that being said, for people who are seeking licensure, right, as candidates, they might also have the supervisor do administrative supervision. So, Ashley, in your mind, what does that look like?
Administrative supervision is more the management piece. So, how is the business run? How do referrals come in? How does billing happen? How do team members work together or not if it's a larger agency? And the example I like to give is when I worked at a residential facility, I had an administrative supervisor who was not a clinician. She was the unit manager, and so she was several levels above me. And I was required to meet with her between weekly and monthly for administrative supervision. So looking at things like policy, documentation, not the clinical piece, but who's on your caseload and why, and are they going to school, and are they, you know, following the rules on the unit. So less of the clinical component for sure, because that wasn't her lane. But that's the example I always use because it's so
Mm-hmm.
clear cut. She's not a licensed therapist. She doesn't have a master's degree, and she's not providing me clinical supervision, but she still provides me supervision.
Right,
And
right.
that person could be a licensed therapist in a different setting. And so I think that is where some confusion is there might be a group practice owner who does all the management, administrative pieces, and who might meet with a pre-licensed supervision, but is not providing the clinical supervision or the hours needed for licensure.
Right. So this is very common, like for people in agencies or community mental health
Mhm.
who have an administrative supervisor saying, write your notes on time. Are you following all the components we need? Are you documenting what we ask you to document? That kind of like administrative task. And then have a clinical supervisor that we hire on the outside of like, hey, I'm not really getting a chance to staff these cases in depth. So our community has told us for folks in community mental health, it's hard to get the full supervision experience with 1 hour a week when this person
Mhm.
has 12, 15, 20 clinicians under them.
Mhm.
So it might look mostly administrative on that end.
Right,
And so this
right,
person might seek an external secondary
right.
supervisor for clinical work, especially if they have a specialty you're interested in, a population you want to serve, some other certification that you're interested in pursuing. Like a lot of us have now normalized that it's pretty normal to have multiple supervisors depending on your
Mhm.
circumstance.
I agree.
So administrative, Not the sexy part of supervision,
Yeah.
definitely important of like documenting your hours, how many clients do you have on your caseload, what's your caseload looking like right now. So for folks who are candidates, you might have someone who fills the bucket for both, who's doing clinical supervision with you in addition to administrative,
Mhm.
to say, I need to know your caseload, I need to sign off on your notes, I need to make sure you're doing timely filing, all that kind of stuff. So those two kind of go hand in hand or could be separate.
Mhm.
Now we enter this third category, which is where
Yeah.
Medicaid and some insurances, some private insurances are allowing this, which is supervisory billing. How would you define this one, Ashley?
I would define that as a licensed therapist who is credentialed with insurance is allowed by that insurance company to have a pre-licensed person bill under them. So do you want to explain like logistically what that actually means?
Yep, we're gonna have to.
Yeah.
Because that's I think this is the confusion of
Mhm.
why I've had so many different free consults in the last month, last week and a half, really, of people saying, "Hey, I thought I could take Medicaid," and it's like, yes,
Mhm.
and yes, you can, but not under your own practice, right? So what
Right.
Ashley is alluding to is this person who's licensed, this licensed counselor, social work, whoever it is, who's credentialed with insurance, has permission and attests that they are providing supervisory billing to someone underneath them. So what that
Mhm.
looks like from a hierarchy is they've hired someone under them in their business. So when these folks are coming into a consult with me or with Ashley saying, hey, I want to take Medicaid in my own practice, the problem is you can't take it in your own practice because
Right.
Medicaid, for example, candidates don't exist to Medicaid.
Mhm.
That's how I've described it, not in a rude way, but just like they don't know who you are. They don't want to work with you until you're licensed. Medicaid is old school like that. And so even though we have community mental health centers and group practices that have people taking Medicaid, it's all under a company or a business name that's licensed and is allowed to take Medicaid. So
Right.
for folks listening to this video right now, I'm just trying to like say this all different ways to make sure it
Mhm.
sticks. You can take
Absolutely.
Medicaid under a licensed person, which means you can't take
Through
it in a
their
private
business,
practice
though.
through their
Yeah.
business. Yes.
Mhm.
So there is no workaround. I know that people are trying to find someone who's like, hey, will you be my supervisory biller so I can take Medicaid in my practice? No, because what happens is this person contracted with Medicaid gets paid by Medicaid, their business gets paid, then they pay you for the services you've
Mhm.
rendered. So in that way, you look like either an employee or a contractor under someone
Mhm.
else's business, to
Right.
Ashley's point. So it's not, I'm ready to start my own private
Mhm.
practice and start being Medicaid as a candidate. Like that's not an option. You have to work for someone else to make that
Mhm.
happen.
Yep.
So that's been kind of the disappointment of our community when they've come into these calls being like, hey, I'm excited, walk me through the process. And I'm like, the process is you have to work for someone else. So it's a group practice, it's an agency, it's a nonprofit, it's someone else who's contracted with Medicaid who has a licensed professional at the top of the hierarchy making
Right.
that possible.
Mhm.
So I know that's a disappointment to our community. There's some email out there somewhere that's made this more confusing, which is why we felt called to jump on this video to define that. So it's not that you can't work with Medicaid members. You also can work with them pro bono if you want to as a candidate. But to actually bill Medicaid, it has to come from a licensed provider, which in this case is a group practice, agency, or
Right.
community mental health center or nonprofit with someone above you as a candidate that can do that. Anything else you would add to that, Ashley?
I think adding that, insurance views pre-licensed candidates as still learning and growing and needing supervision. And so it's not to prevent these people from working or from working with this population. It's to
Right.
ensure that they have the proper education and experience to work with people, with clients.
Mhm.
And I think after they're licensed, then they can choose to credential with Medicaid. So it's yes, and like you said, and it's not right now. Not that it can never happen. We just have to make sure that our pre-licensed people are providing quality services and understand what it means to bill Medicaid or bill insurance or, work in this field where documentation is a lot more strict than,
Mhm.
your non-Medicaid outpatient client. Um, and then after 2 years or 3 years or however long it takes to get licensed, if you want to go out on your own, by all means go out on your own and do your own work and work for yourself. We love to support people in that journey.
Yeah, we are all about all of you taking Medicaid. It's lucrative, it's helpful, it serves the community that needs to be served. And so, yeah, it's just about what's the path to get you to that a bit that possibility.
Mhm.
In this case,
Exactly.
as a candidate, it's coming under somebody else. So, from these three buckets of clinical supervisor, administrative supervisor, and supervisory biller, this is why it gets messy, right? It's like you
Mhm.
might have someone who's an administrative supervision person as well as a supervisory biller, because that person is making sure you have notes that are written for the services they're billing. A
Right.
supervisory biller person has to attest that they are responsible for anyone underneath them. And so that form says, I have plans to do this under my EIN group practice or whatever that looks like. And at that point, their name is on the claim,
Mhm.
right? So this is what still blows my mind in our community. And I say this every week of like, okay, so the rendering person on the claim is the licensed professional who's
Yep.
contracted with Medicaid.
Yep.
So at that point, they're taking a lot of responsibility for you as a
Yes,
candidate
we
who is not
are.
existing to Medicaid. So I just want to like call that out for people. And with that in mind, you can have a supervisory biller as one individual that you're working with. You can have an administrative person if you have a whole hierarchy in a group practice or agency or whatnot. You might have a clinical supervisor within the company or outside of the company.
Yep.
Where this all gets more sticky though is if you're a contractor. So
Yep.
let's just like mic drop the last piece here, which is in
Yeah.
the state of Colorado, from a labor law perspective, this is a conversation I have a lot as well. From a labor law perspective, you cannot receive supervision as a contractor from the person who is contracting you to do the work. I'll let that sink in for our viewers for a second. You cannot receive supervision for the service you're rendering as a contractor. Is this happening still in our community? Yes, because every week there's someone who's like, I didn't know that because DORA and Mental Health Practice Act and labor laws of Colorado are not speaking to each other. So these are each three different entities. They're telling us how to do what we do. So
Right.
contractor, think of a plumber. You contract a plumber to fix the sink. They invoice you for the service that they know how to render on their own without your supervision. You pay them for what they did. Same thing applies here in mental health at this point with contracting in the state of Colorado. So this is why you could have a clinical supervisor helping you get hours in one as one person. You could have a supervisor biller as another person. You could have an administrative person within the company itself. And it gets a little confusing, which is why we wanted to
Does.
talk about it.
Yep, it does.
So, if you have someone in your life who is a contractor receiving regular supervision from the company they work for as a contractor, that's a no no. So, they need to contract out for a different supervisor, which is why all three of these different labels are possible.
Right.
All that to say, anyone who's listening to this that's a candidate who wants to take Medicaid, which is a population we love, Ashley and I
Mhm.
both love and want to
Yes.
support you with, your one route as a candidate right now is to contract under someone else's business who's licensed with Medicaid, allow them to bill the service with them as the rendering provider, attesting they're supervising you, which means they're looking at your notes, signing off on everything. And that's how you can serve those Medicaid members in this moment until you're licensed. So that is
Yep.
the main takeaway from this video, although we've defined three other buckets of like how this looks. I think we wanted to make a video to just hopefully in some ways simplify this, even though it's not simple. But just
Yeah.
like put a name to here are the ways this works in Colorado with labor law versus Medicaid versus DORA. DORA dictates regular supervision for licensure hours.
Yep.
Administrative supervision is more of like a cover your ass, make sure you're doing your
Mhm.
paperwork, that you're filing things on time, writing notes that are compliant. And then supervisory billing is, hey, I'm letting you render a service and I'm taking the brunt of that risk. And so I'm
And it's
attesting that I'm
dictated by
supervising you.
insurance too. Yeah.
Yeah. And they say regular supervision, whatever that's defined as, right? So this is super complicated, but hopefully this is like taking away some of the confusion. Maybe you have more questions from this, which is natural. But for folks who've jumped into calls recently saying, I'd love to take Medicaid into my practice or see clients who have United or Aetna or any of the others that allow supervisory billing, you're still not allowed to do that as an unlicensed candidate. You have to work under someone else's business that's licensed and contracted with that insurance to do so. Final thoughts, Ashley, on this idea?
I think my final thought isn't directly related to this, but if you do have a clinical supervisor, make sure that you have a written agreement about hours being signed and that it is for clinical supervision and that those hours can be signed towards licensure. Because I think, like you said, with all this confusion, there's people who think they're receiving clinical supervision, but they're not. And so
Right.
that's also something I want to caution people to really think about and make sure they have what's in place needed to get that license and that it's actually in place.
Yeah. So for folks who are working in community mental health, it's more likely that you have people within the agency that are filling all three roles.
Yep.
But if you have a group practice, if you're part of something different, some other structural organizational difference, yeah, having something in writing out, this is the role this person plays in my professional development. This is the role this person plays in my professional development. Can be really eye-opening, but also like protects you. Like, you're like, am I getting clinical supervision for hours? Am I getting hours required to get paid at this organization? And am I getting supervision of my clients I'm rendering under a provider who's licensed? So those are
Right.
those three buckets and how that might look. So I love that idea of like, yep, needs to be in writing. How do I make this clear? How do I make it clear for myself as the clinician, getting all the support in all these different ways, if that is part of your next steps to get licensed to and still serve this population. So hopefully this clears the air a little bit. I'm sure there are still more questions. Ashley and I are happy to be a resource for you. There are plenty of group practices offering supervisory billing who have their nuts and bolts set up the way it needs to
Oh,
be.
absolutely.
So that's probably the ray of hope for those of you watching who are like, I'm a candidate and I really want to serve any of these populations. Know that there are options for you. There are people who are hiring candidates for this very reason to help you serve the population you want. And they have attested that they are supervisory billers for that purpose. So seek them out, ask us questions. If you want referrals of those agencies, let me know, or those group practices. But this video was really meant to just say, hey, here's the confusion, here are the definitions, and go from there. So hopefully you can continue to still serve a population you love under the framework that we've identified today. Ashley, thank you as always for your
Thank
thoughts and
you.
wisdom on this topic. I appreciate you. All right, viewers, stay tuned. We'll see you next time.